It is 1 p.m. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the second of 6 free live online events during Business Continuity Awareness Month. My name is Roland, and I'm the founder and CEO of FindBob, a technology company that's encouraging better transition behavior within the insurance and financial services industry. Over the course of the pandemic, many businesses have rushed to adopt business continuity practices. However, for our industry, preparing for the unexpected means much more than transitioning to remote work and Zoom calling with our clients. It means ensuring we build businesses that will last the duration of our clients' lifetimes and ultimately protect the value of the businesses our agents and advisors have built. With less than 23% of our industry having contingency and continuity plans in place, we need to do a better job. This year's inaugural theme is Invest in Your Resilience. The pandemic has exposed weakness in our industry. Now is the time for agents and advisors to invest in building robust continuity and contingency plans that will protect themselves, their business, their loved ones, and of course their clients. Business Continuity Awareness Month is an industry-wide carrier, dealer, product agnostic series of educational events that kicked off on May 7th with engaging dialogue on the importance of business continuity with industry experts. Yesterday, we dove deeper into contingency and listened how these progressive corporate leaders were influencing resilient behavior in their own distribution networks and offered some sage advice for you to get started. And continuing this week, we're offering another 4 live events. We'll cover continuity, contingency. Today, we're focusing on succession, and later we'll focus on valuation and legal aspects of planning from folks who understand the mission, provide knowledge, strategic and tactical advice to help agents and advisors build resilient businesses and inspire them to take the pledge. If you haven't already, take the challenge and commit to putting a business continuity plan in place by the end of this calendar year. Interested to learn more on what drives value in insurance agencies? Next Wednesday, Lucas Paris, VP of Mercer Capital, will share why all insurance agencies aren't created equal and provide some thoughts on the impact COVID-19 has on valuations. If you haven't already, claim your All Access Pass by going to our landing page by clicking the link in the chat. Charities across North America are launching urgent appeals for help as a result of COVID-19. Our May 7th event raised money for a selected Canada Helps charity. Thanks to these incredible participating companies, we raised $4,000, which is being directed to a food bank in British Columbia. In recognition of their time and energy for their important voices yesterday, a donation was made on behalf of our panelists to Give Directly, a charitable movement that provides COVID-19 cash relief to Americans in need in their attempt to raise $100 million for 100,000 US families. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to your moderator, Afsar Shah, business and regulatory coach for The Personal Coach. Afsar is a corporate lawyer by training with close to 30 years experience in the financial services industry. Afsar has held a variety of roles, increasing responsibility with several of Canada's largest financial institutions, including general legal counsel, corporate strategy development, M&A, as well as advisor training and regulatory education. He was executive assistant to Clerica Life's CEO for 4 years, and during that time, he led Clerica's M&A department. For 10 years, he held Sun Life's mutual fund dealer, including 4 years as its president. For the better part of the last 15 years, Afsar has traveled across Canada, working with advisors and empowering them to develop strategies to meet the many challenges that confront them. In 2018, he joined The Personal Coach, where he provides customized one-on-one business coaching to financial advisors and their teams across Canada. His practice is focusing on helping advisors buy and sell books of business, succession planning, and better understanding and adapting to the changing regulatory landscape. In his free time, he enjoys golfing, working out, reading on a wide variety of subjects, and indulging his 2 wonderful kids. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce the voice of Mr. Afsar Shah. Afsar, okay. Over to you, my friend.
Okay, thank you, Roland. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. So first off, let me start by congratulating you, Roland, for putting together this terrific series of webinars and for focusing attention on such an important topic. I think it's a great service that you're doing for the industry, so thank you for that. And thank you for allowing me to be part of it. I'm delighted to facilitate today's discussion even though it's only by voice. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I should have gone to engineering instead of law school, but there you have it. So we have 1 hour today, and we're going to spend all of that time talking about what I think is arguably one of the most significant and important strategic issues facing our industry today, and that is succession planning. I think, Roland alluded to it. I think we're all well aware of the stats that show that only a small percentage of advisors in Canada and the U.S. have a documented plan in place for the succession of their business. And so I think if I were to frame up the challenge for us as an industry, it's how do we help advisors to start to take action, and what can we do to help them develop plans that are robust, that are effective, and that are value added? So that's what we're going to talk about in this hour. So the purpose for this webinar is really to provide everyone here with some insights, with some practical tips and suggestions to help each of you to take action and to develop plans that are robust and effective. That's a lot to do on a broad topic in an hour, but if we can provide you with some clarity, some perspective and direction on some of the key issues related to succession planning, and then I think we'll have, it'll be time well spent. We'll have achieved success. And so to help provide that clarity, that perspective, and that direction, I'm delighted to be joined by three of the most well-respected subject matter experts on this topic in our industry, who between them have well over 100 years experience working with advisors, helping them grow and transition their businesses. I can assure you there's going to be no lack of opinion with these boys. And so what I'll do is I'll introduce them prior to each one answering their first question, so as not to get lost in all of the introductions. So let's start with our first question. And I want to start with George Hartman. So George is a 45-year veteran of the industry. He's been an advisor, executive, coach, consultant, and his career spans both the insurance and investment industries. He's an insightful industry observer and prolific writer, having published 5 best-selling books for advisors. For more than 10 years, he's written the Coaches Forum for the Canadian Trade Journal Investment Executive. George is also a highly sought-after keynote speaker at conferences around the world, and as one of the industry's best-known strategists, practice management mentors, and practice valuation experts, he coaches top-performing advisors in Canada and the U.S. and consults with financial firms on their business strategy and succession plans. So welcome, George. I want to start by providing advisors with some clarity on some key terms and concepts. And a lot of advisors equate the term succession planning with continuity planning and exit planning. We know that these terms and concepts are not interchangeable. So can you start by providing us with a very clear working definition of what succession planning is, what it isn't, and how it differs from exit planning and continuity planning?
Sure, I'm happy to start that way, Afsar. And you'll note in the introduction, 45 out of that 100 years I can claim experience sitting here. So I'm an old guy, I've been around a long time. And this topic, although it has been of relevance to people for many, many years, has really come into the spotlight I would say within the last 5 to 10 years. When I first began talking about succession planning many years ago, it was a novel idea that people found somewhat interesting. But today, as you indicated, we're down to the real hard reality of the fact that people will eventually have to succeed or exit from their business. So, and that I think points out the differences between continuity planning and succession or exit planning. Continuity planning is around an event that may or may not occur. We're typically talking about things, it could be as recent as a major viral infection, such as we're experiencing. It could be a market meltdown. It could be a cybersecurity break. It could be an earthquake, a fire, all those type of contingencies. So it's something that may or may not happen. And as a thoughtful business person, of course, we want to have some plan in place as to how to deal with those events should they happen. So it really applies to all advisors. Succession planning, on the other hand, is more typically of interest to advisors who are within 5 to 10 years of their intended exit from the business. And if we talk about the difference between, as you asked the difference between exit planning and succession planning, we do use those terms interchangeably. And in fact, they are triggered by the same event. That is, an advisor wanting to or having to transition out of the business. I think the distinction there is that succession planning is really about the business. It's about what happens to the business after the founder or the key advisor leaves. Whereas exit planning is more about how the departing founder or leader leading advisor, manages their own life after they have left the business. So as I think I may have heard this from one of these other two wise men, John or Peter, that succession planning is what happens to the business when the founder is gone. Exit planning is what happens to the founder when the business is gone. Not a play on words, but a subtle distinction.
Okay, thank you, George. So let me bring in John Novachis, and John is the Executive Vice President for Investment Planning Counsel. He leads the firm's various strategic initiatives aimed at attracting top performing advisors. He's driven to help advisors implement strategies to increase their operational efficiency and establish their personal brand within their communities while growing their business. John obtained his MBA at Queen's and Cornell University, where he developed an innovative new business model designed to support advisors who are ready to monetize and transition their business. So welcome, John. So John, you heard George's definitions. How do you view, please feel free to add to that, but what I'm really interested in, how do you view these three terms and concepts? In your view, are they mutually exclusive or should they operate interdependently?
Thank you, Afsar, and thank you, George, for stepping up and articulating that you're 45 of the 100. So I'm going to try and be the lesser part of the equation. But I want to thank you all and thank all the participants for joining us today on this very important and very, very timely topic. I think George summarized the terms very, very well, and how I would address the sense or exclusivity of these three terms is any successful business has to address all three elements. So yes, you could. Because you could answer this question by how you view the world, and you know, I get a chance to work with some of the greatest financial advisors in the industry at IPC. We've got some of the best advisors in the country, and I know there are many other great advisors in the country as well. And so I get a chance to talk to a lot of them in my role, whether it's helping an existing IPC advisor address their succession needs, or somebody looking to, you know, possibly join the firm or rethink how they are approaching their business and their succession strategy. But I think the one thing that is the common thread throughout all of this is just sort of how you view your business. Do you view your business as an entrepreneur, or do you view your business as what sometimes is called the practitioner type of a model? And so, you know, what's happened in the last little while tested our remote ability. So if we didn't have a business continuity plan, we would struggle to operate. If we didn't embrace the technological capabilities, we would not be able to stay close to our customers. If our customers didn't adopt the technology and the support models that we put into place, we wouldn't be able to reach them. So, you know, that is an important part of any business, is how would you operate in the event of an unprecedented time like we're in right now. Succession is really, it's a normal course of our business as well. And whether we're talking about the successors of ourselves, successors in the business, if we view ourselves as a business, as an entrepreneurial firm, we have to think about how would the business operate if we weren't there. And part of any good business, you have to have a people strategy that continues to foster the growth and development of people, including yourself. So we have to work ourselves out of the job in order to have call ourselves an entrepreneurial and a business that people would value to buy in the future. Because that's one of the reasons why we became entrepreneurs, was to enjoy the freedom. Honestly, there's upside, there's risks associated with it, but it's really being clear on what we're building. And on the exit side of things, sure, start with the end in mind. we have many advisors on the line today that one of the largest assets they have in their net worth statement is their practice. And so if they are not thinking about the eventual exit and how to monetize that great asset that they built, well, really, what's going to happen in the next little while as more and more practices come up, and in this demographic period where lots of advisors are approaching retirement age, and maybe perhaps a lack of new blood coming in behind those advisors, how are these businesses going to transition? And if there aren't people there and a strong exit plan that addresses people, clients, tax, financial matters, it's going to be a challenge. So, quickly back to summarize is you have to look at this as three elements in any business, and I wouldn't view them as mutual exclusive. They're very dependent.
Fair enough. So they need to be integrated into one broader, comprehensive plan.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, John. So, Peter, let me bring you into the conversation. Peter Wouters is Director of Tax, Retirement, and Estate Planning Services with Empire Life. He has over 3 decades of experience helping financial advisors develop optimal financial solutions for their clients. Peter is well recognized in the industry as an expert in the areas of tax, retirement, and estate planning. He's a graduate of McMaster University, Northeastern, and Widener Universities. He's also a registered financial gerontologist. He's obtained 16 professional designations. And Peter, as I was reviewing your bio, you have way too many professional and industry affiliations to mention. Peter, you need a hobby.
I do. I have a few.
But Peter, please feel free to add your thoughts. But what I'd really like you to do is put the issue of strategic or succession planning into some context for us. And by that, I mean, talk about the market forces currently in play. John started to touch on that in his answer. But talk about the size of the market opportunity facing advisors and the potential economic benefits associated with having a robust succession plan in place.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to this very, very dedicated and talented panel. I'll very quickly say that, thank you, John, and thank you, George, for summing up what I was going to say anyway. I do believe that these 3 types of planning are integrated. They should be viewed as an integrated and connected process. And I don't know if I heard that or not, but this is a process, not an event. So continuity planning is about the process of what happens, about providing that continuity of service to clients. Succession planning is about the process of someone now easing out of the business and into something else, hence exit planning being an integral part of that. I find that when I'm looking at observations of business transfer over the last 3 decades that I've been involved in that, is that here are some of the things that are coming into play that have been in play. And like George, when I started talking about this thing in earnest across the country over 20 years ago, it was an interesting topic. And there were some people that needed it and valued it right off the bat. And there were a few even that took notes and said, I want to get started on that right now. But the vast majority said, I am decades away from that. Now, of course, we're looking at younger advisors in the business who are thinking, well, I still don't need to do this. But the reality is that the younger advisors in the business are in their 50s. So they're not so young anymore. So we have first off an aging demographic. And when you're looking at an aging demographic, one of the things you've got to think about is that at some point in time, sooner rather than later, there are going to be more sellers than buyers. Now, what's always been the case is that there have always been more sellers than qualified buyers, but there are going to be simply more sellers than buyers at some point in time. That will simply happen because there doesn't seem to be enough new blood coming into the business to replace the numbers of advisors that could be exiting, given the fact that so many of them now are in their late 50s, early 60s, early 70s. And the thing about this, about getting this right, whether we're talking about contingency planning, continuity planning, succession planning, and exit planning, is that, people make fun of the fact that I've taken all these courses, I've got all these degrees, and I share a little story that at one point in time, I'd even thought about going into actuarial science. Of course, everybody in head office is going to go nuts and said, a guy like you, you'll be really dangerous. And they said, well, of what use and what purpose could that be? And they said, if I can't demonstrate any useful purpose to me taking this course, in the first semester, I'll drop out of the course. And they said, okay, fair bet. And about 2 weeks later, my prof came up to me and he gave us a project. And he said, Peter, he said to everybody, I want you to take the current mortality and morbidity tables that exist in the Canadian marketplace, find a subset of that, and come up with an essay about your predictions and your conclusions about just morbidity and mortality among a certain segment of the marketplace. So I picked the insurance sector, financial services sector, investment advisors, and life insurance advisors. And then I picked people that were in practice for themselves, independent advisors. And it's a 5,000-word essay. I don't even think you want to listen to the executive summary, but let me sum up what I shared with the professor that I think is pretty compelling. What I found out is this, as advisors: if you haven't died, suffered a disability or critical illness before the age of 65, there's a really good chance it's going to happen after the age of 65. I mean, is that lost in anybody? The challenge is that everyone is going to leave this business. Mm-hmm. The question is, on whose terms? Will it be on your terms, or is it going to be on the terms set by your executor, your grieving widow or kids, or some stranger? Like, who's the best person to make that decision and set up the terms? You or somebody else? You with your background or somebody else? We're also facing an evolving business model. So this business is becoming a lot more complicated than it was before. We have holistic planning, which is now coming into full bloom right now. It's now a ground stake. It's a table stake for clients. They are expecting this. We're seeing more networking, more services, more integrated businesses. We're seeing multiple compensation models existing. There's much more compliance and overlap, which is forcing some advisors to divest themselves of certain lines of business or certain types of strategies. I find out as well that in observations about the business, we have so many advisors now in their late 50s, early 60s, early 70s, who are not emotionally nor financially ready to call it quits. And they view succession planning as calling it quits completely. And the challenge they have with that is the same challenge that most people have when they enter their 60s or 70s. And that is this: they cannot answer the following question. When who you are is defined by what you do, and you don't do that anymore, who are you now? Mm-hmm. And exit planning helps to address that, helps to answer that. I also find out that although most sellers, haven't put together, potential sellers have not put together any type of a plan. The numbers I hear about are, less than 1 out of 4 have got a formal plan of any kind. Half of them don't have a named successor. Most buyers don't have a clear strategy either, although that's changing. They probably should have a strategy. And that breakdowns between potential buyers and sellers are often due to philosophical or emotional issues. And this pandemic has brought on something that I've talked about for years, and that is that the future happens slowly and gradually, and then all of a sudden. And that's what happened with the pandemic. A lot of things we're seeing right now, a lot of things we're changing, are going to be changed permanently. And this is a nice test run for advisors to say, well, are you as successful now as you were before? Are you struggling? Are you having some challenges? If this lasts for another year or 2 years, are you going to be able to survive? What's your practice actually going to look like? And like John said, you got to begin with the end in mind. And if you're looking at your practice as a business, you need to start thinking that way and do it at the very beginning, not 5 or 10 years before, or not, as I said during a little prep meeting, you don't put lipstick on a pig 3 minutes before you sell the pig and said, this is going to be good. This is something you got to plan for over an extended period of time. And I think that some advisors are recognizing the precarious nature of their business, because if they're having a struggle with their business right now, if they would have a struggle now passing that on to somebody else right now, then that's now. And this may or may not go away, but now is high time, and it never is too late, to start putting pen to paper and start writing down some of the things that probably are important to you. And that may begin with a contingency plan or a continuity plan, because to me, as I said, all of these things are connected, and it is a process. Just like the planning aspect of all of these things are a process. It's not a one-time sit-down event that you do by yourself in the basement of your home.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. And I wasn't making fun of you. I was merely expressing admiration for your designations and my own feelings of inadequacy. So George, there's one other concept I'd like for you to explain. The title of this webinar refers to building an enduring practice. This is not a concept that we hear a lot about. So can you briefly explain what this concept refers to and why it's so important?
Oh, sure. Maybe the best way to explain it is almost to illustrate it. If you can imagine a pyramid, there's my pyramid, and a pyramid is divided into 4 levels. And at the base of the pyramid, I call that the survival base. And I think anyone on the call today will acknowledge that starting out in this industry is a matter of survival. And so if you're on this call and interested in succession, clearly you have survived. In fact, I would argue that probably the majority of people on the call today are at the 2nd level in the pyramid, which I call success, in the sense that they have a successful practice that allows them to earn a good living, provide good advice and service to their clients, establish a reputation and a profile and a position in their community. So the majority of advisors are there. The 3rd level, the next level up, so to speak, once we've survived and built a successful practice, is to build what I call sustainability or endurability in the practice. And that comes about when the practice is bigger than you are. And by that, I don't necessarily mean in terms of number of people, although that's often the case, but it's in its presence, its capabilities, its reputation, everything that extends beyond the founding advisor. And if you're going, and then the final step, the very peak of the pyramid, we would call succession, or success as it's defined by various people when they've reached that point of self-actualization, if you want to use that. But that 3rd level up, the sustainability or the endurability, is so critical if we want to leave a legacy for ourselves when we do exit the business, if we want to ensure that our clients continue to be serviced in the manner that they come to expect and deserve after we leave the business, if we're going to leave some asset that has monetary value to our family, if we're going to have our own reputation continue to be. I'm not suggesting they're going to, mount you on a charging steed in the park as a statue to your great work, but to have a reputation, a profile, and to be remembered as a kind, generous, thoughtful, and serving person. We can't do that if we just have a practice that is going to basically diminish or deteriorate or close entirely when we walk out the door, as Peter pointed out, as we inevitably will, whether by choice or circumstance. That's how I would define enduring practice, Afsar.
Excellent. Thank you, George. So I want to change gears a little bit and discuss an issue that I know a number of advisors struggle with, and that is, I don't think advisors have a very clear or a clear enough sense of the various scenarios and options available to them when it comes to succession planning. That is to say, a robust succession plan need not be just about the sale of 100% of their business and then a walk into the sunset by the advisor and into retirement. So to all 3 of you, starting with John, could each of you give an example of a kind of succession plan that you've helped your clients develop that does not fit the simple sell and retire kind of scenario? And how did these scenarios help your clients achieve their longer term goals and objectives?
No, thank you,
Ashred. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep.
I'm maybe getting a little bit of an echo. I think that's better now. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah, you're good, John.
Okay, perfect. This is an excellent question because I think the general nature of this subject is everybody sort of categorized that a lot of these transactions are one of let's sell the practice and move on to the next phase of our life. That might be golfing, that might be traveling, that might be doing lots of cool stuff. But what I find I've done, I would say, a couple of dozen of these transactions over the last few years, and they are sort of changing quite dynamically along the way of how people want to approach the area of succession and or monetization. So there's one specific case that I think might just sort of test or temper the call today is a very large Ontario practice. I would say it was about $270 million of wealth management assets in an IROC registration model. The practice grew very rapidly through organic and mergers and acquisitions, kicking out great cash flows, very, very efficient. And, you know, the owner of the business kind of stood back and said, I've built this great business, and there's a wonderful asset that has been created as a result of this. How should I be thinking about protecting that asset? And if we look at our business at least in the entrepreneurial wealth management space, we run 100% of revenues are completely variable. They're completely variable and they're linked to market, right? But our business operations, to run an effective business, as the fine panelists are describing, you need infrastructure, you need good planning, you need exit approach, you need continuity, you need wonderful talent. Well, what do those costs look like? Those costs look like fixed costs. And so what happens when revenues are growing and fixed costs are probably growing at a lower rate? So there's a delta in between those called profit. So what happens when market turns or when revenues impact, that all of a sudden we can go from profitability to what our founder talks about, bankruptcy in this business. You need to think about this asset beyond just, hey, I'm going to turn 65 or 75 and I'm going to retire and sell my business at 3 times trailers and that'll be that. So in this particular situation, the business owner, I would say, was in his mid-40s. And mid-40s, building a great practice, $270 million of assets, he stood back and said, well, I kind of like the opportunity to monetize this asset, and I think I should de-risk myself. And so the transaction that I helped this business owner was to help acquire his business and retain him and his staff, albeit in a different operating model, with completely not variable anymore, but in a different type of incentive-based operating model that allows the continuity of the client relationship. So what did the business owner get? They monetized a great asset. And if they look at what's happened to markets now, that monetization may not have been the same. So the asset, the monetization was crystallized. They got to continue to work in the business in a different operating model. And the clients virtually had no change of relationship. It's a continuity of the existing relationship. So this example was really about monetization, de-risking while staying engaged in the business for a prolonged period of time. And I anticipate this individual will be with us for the next 20 years and help us build a great business. But he did not like the prospects of that risk to his revenues in a growing business, and obviously the financial strain that can come with this, not only the emotional side of it. So a little bit different.
Yeah, fantastic. George, over to you. What can you give us an example of a different kind of succession plan you've helped your clients put together?
Yeah, we've done a couple along the lines of what John has suggested as well, where people are tired of the running the business and want to get back to running their relationship with their clients. Cost of capital is cheap if the deal needs to be financed. There are lots of buyers out there right now, subject to some qualifications and so on. So that's a very useful strategy. An interesting one, and it doesn't apply to everyone, obviously, but in this particular case, we had a practice that was built around a very large figure, and I mean large in terms of community presence, reputation, familiarity with the marketplace, and so on. Built a very, very large practice up in the $500 million of assets under management range very, very quickly. Had a couple of assistants who were initially pegged as successors, But it turns out that they weren't really interested in building the business beyond what had already been done. They would be very good, very successful, very happy in a maintenance role. And with a practice that size, they could service the clients well and for themselves provide a nice lifestyle. But that left our founder, who was far from ready to retire, with basically no successor for that business. So our suggestion to him was to start another practice, which he did. Besides, started from zero all over again, and applied the same sort of methodology that he did to build the first practice, except this time the associates that he brought on to help him were business developers as well. So that practice grew very quickly, and over a very short number of years got to the same size as the other one. So now from a monetary perspective, he has twice as large a practice, which he will eventually realize the benefit of probably within the next couple of years. But he also has confidence that all of his work is going to be carried on both from a maintenance and from a business development standpoint. So interesting in the sense that many people struggle to build one practice. This fellow went out to build two and ultimately sold them both, or will sell them both.
Excellent. Peter, how about yourself?
The example that comes to mind is a scenario where an aging advisor who, he was in his late 60s at the point in time, had started the business when he was just 20 years old, had become very, very successful and very old school in the way he operated. He drove on his car like he was in a milk run. He would spend the entire day and night driving everywhere to talk to any kind of a client that he had. He thought every client's relationship was very, very important to them. So he was very, very hands-on. And he said to me at one point in time, he said, you know what, I'm ready to leave this business. I've made a really good dollar on it. I know you can sell your business. I would give it away to the right guy. I would give it away if I was comfortable they would treat my clients the way that I would treat them. Now, of course, he didn't actually do that, but as he's looking at his practice, there was another advisor that was looking at expanding, and they had quite an overlap territorially and with the same type of clients, not the exact clients, but the same type of clients. And both of them realized an opportunity to do initially a merger because the older advisor was not ready to retire. And one of the things you've got to keep in mind today is that you think about your clients, let alone yourself. There are fewer and fewer people that want to do a hard stop at age 55 or 60 or 65. They want to do less of something, but they don't want to stop completely because they said, what am I going to do next for the next 30 years of my life? Because they haven't answered another question. So ideally, when you're looking at a succession plan and you're considering it as a process, what we're able to structure is a situation where a lot of the administration and things were consolidated under one practice. And the younger advisor took that and brought on a business manager to run what was now over 20,000 clients. And then the older advisor was there for relationships, to go out and do a little hunting once in a while. And by hunting, I mean digging up new business, to make sure it was all compliant. And there was, both of them had some group clients that they didn't want. They packaged that up collectively, marketed that off to another advisor completely. And then they set up an agreement, which I think is part of good succession planning and exit planning. They set up an agreement over what the terms and conditions would be of the old advisor actually staying on. So they said, as long as everything is working well and you're keeping up to date with what's going on and there aren't compliance issues and those sorts of things, and you're getting really forgetful and what have you, then you can do this as long as you want. But I'll tell you what, at the very beginning, you set the terms. So the outgoing advisor, the person who was selling but staying on in the business, was setting the terms about how long they wanted to be as active as possible in the practice. And the buying advisor said, and yes, and I need you for that because you are the glue. This is, after all, and no one's mentioned this so far, this is a relationship business. So we have to talk about the orderly transition and transfer from the clients to the new advisor. They got to buy into that new advisor, and they don't have to. I mean, clients aren't property. We didn't have an Emancipation Proclamation in Canada because they're not. So we had to build time and effort to do that, and the outgoing advisor could be very helpful in that entire process, to be there for key events, for key renewals, key times of the year, and for the rest of the time, if they want to take off 4 weeks or 6 weeks at a blow, no problem. They're not violating their license obligations. They don't have to worry because that continuity of service is being provided. So they did that. Phase 2 of this, and we set this all up at the very beginning, phase 2 was it was going to be a mutual decision. The people would sit down with each other with performance standards, every quarter and every 6 months to things how we're going, and then would mutually decide whether things are going to be okay. And then they said, 3 to 5 years down the road, if things were going to work properly, it's the ace in the hole became the buyer's decision as to whether or not he or she wanted that advisor to stay on. If everything was great, that's fine. But the outgoing advisor was simply blind to the fact that they were now becoming a bit of a liability. You could now, over 6 months or a year, exit that individual into something else. And it ended up being very, very successful. It was smooth. It wasn't that hard stop. People could ease onto it. And once people got used to the idea that, yes, they could take off 4 weeks, there was no guilt feelings about doing that. Clients were getting the same service, in some cases, better service. It made that transition as part of exit planning a lot smoother for the older advisor, and it didn't require any type of pressure among the younger advisor shoving this other guy out of the way, because they were acting as glue. So it worked very, very well.
Mm-hmm. What's striking when I'm listening to each of you talk about these various scenarios is that, yes, it's easy to say it's a process, not an event. But what's striking is that these initiatives are years in the making. John, you talked about your client being in the early 40s. Peter, you talked about your client being in their 60s, but this transition plan essentially took a number of years to play out. And George, you talked about 5 to 10 years. So I think that's an aspect of succession planning that we can't overlook. So we've talked about what, why, and when. Let's talk a little bit about the how, and let's try and give the attendees some practical tips and suggestions on what steps they should take in developing a succession plan. And one of the most frequently asked questions I get from advisors is, I know I need to develop a plan, but where do I start? So to each of you, starting with John, if an advisor were to ask you this, what would you say to them? What's the first step or the thing that you would recommend that they do?
Oh, thank you. That's there's many ways you can go at this, but I want to set a little bit of a proxy for what's happening in the wealth management space right now. And if I use a proxy of the Canadian mutual fund industry, the Canadian mutual fund industry is, depending upon markets, let's say it's $1.7 or $1.8 trillion. The data would suggest that about 40% of that $1.7, $1.8 trillion of client assets is attributed to the independent channel, the independent wealth management professional. So if that is roughly 600 billion, let's just use that as the next slice of the onion. What are the demographics look like of the 600 billion? The client demographics, the advisor demographics. The advisor demographics are clearly saying that advisors are in the on average are in the sort of last 5 years potentially of their practice and moving into a retirement stage. So the data might suggest, and I use our own data, about half of our assets under administration are held by advisors that will approach retirement in the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years. So if our business is a representative sample of the industry proxy that I use, you could say there's about $300 to $400 billion of advisor assets, independent advisor assets, that will change hands in the next 3 to 5 years. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean is that you better be thinking about your practice as an enduring practice, right? And so if you're not thinking about your practice as, how do I work myself out of this business? How do I make myself and my team so efficient that the value of my business will endure beyond me being there? That is the key element. And so if I bring back the proxy of the 3 to 400 billion changing hands, if you're one of those advisors, let's look at the supply and demand situation that exists. We know that when supply crosses demand, And George used the triangle, and he used the X, right? And right at that X is what's called the equilibrium price. So that's what a buyer, a supplier, and somebody that demands the business, that's where they come together, and that's where that sweet spot price is. So if businesses are going to endure, and they are going to address this area of monetization and succession in the next 3 to 5 years, I think it's very intuitive to suggest that supply is going to increase. Would you say? So the supply of businesses coming into the marketplace approaching succession will increase. Well, if we know that basic economics 101 textbook, that if supply increases, things stay the same, then what's going to happen is the equilibrium price will come down, okay? Because there's more suppliers than buyers. George has said right now there's more buyers than sellers, but that is going to turn around. And if you don't have an enduring practice, why is somebody going to be willing to pay you a lot of money for your hard-earned business if it's not enduring? So I think George said it great in his definition. You got to think about it as a business, as an enduring practice, that it's got to function without you. If it's purely a practitioner and you can't leave the business, I'll put the question back to everyone on the line. There's over 300 people here today. Which practice would you buy? One that can run on its own without you, or one that needs you there? So, and if supply changes, then people will have much more choice, and they will attach value to things like the enduring practice, and actually they will pay a premium for the enduring practice. So that's how I'd like to address this.
Okay, so George, let me just ask you. So what John is pointing out is that stuff's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So time is of the essence, essentially. Better start thinking about your business as an enduring practice, and better start taking action. So what do you say to the advisor who says, great, I'm on board. What's the first thing I need to do? What would be your advice to them?
Well, I'm a big believer in the comment that was made earlier from Stephen Covey, I guess, start with the end in mind. When we're starting out in our business, we always ask advisors to provide us with a vision of what they want their world to look like at some point down the road. And that vision gets refined, redefined several times throughout their career. And finally, we conclude by saying, what would your business look like when it is as successful as you want it to be? And I think the same applies when we start contemplating our eventual transition out of the business. And so I would say to advisors, what will that transition look like when it is ideal for you? What will you be doing? What will your involvement be with your clients? What will your involvement be with the business on a daily basis or at some distance? If we can clearly define that, and again, it's an exercise that's not chiseled in stone, and that as our view of the world changes, we may have to change our vision. But generally, if people can describe for themselves what they want their world to look like post-succession or post-transition, then we can start to put in place all of the various pieces to make it happen. I think that's probably it. To begin by defining what it is you hope to accomplish. There are at least 6 different exit options that I can think of, and each one has its merits and its disadvantages, but we need to decide on which option makes the most sense to us.
Great. So, Peter, I want to come to you, but I want to ask a slightly different question. Just in the interest of time, I want to get a couple more points in. John talked about in the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of stuff happening. This notion of an enduring practice being more valuable. How important is it to keep in mind the perspective? I mean, I know the answer to this one. Keep in mind the perspective of a potential future buyer. Varied. But what I'm really asking for is, what are buyers looking for, and what things do they value when looking to acquire another business? I know you've given a lot of thought to this. You've talked about this extensively. Give me your views on that.
one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we're looking at the value of a practice, is that the value of a practice to a prospective buyer is a function of the future. Yet most sellers are doing a calculation of the value as a function of the past, but it is a function of the future. A buyer or potential buyer is looking at your practice. He's looking or she is looking at what's left after you are gone. And they want to know what that would look like ahead of time. So they want to know whether or not that practice is in fact bigger than you are. George Sigurdson is a very, very long-term friend of mine. We've been friends now for back since the 80s. And his vision statement was this: Sigurdson Financial is bigger than George Sigurdson. His practice is bigger than he is. And typically when you're looking at buying a practice, and yes, there'll be transitions like the example I gave you, but most buyers are not going to not buying you, they're buying what's left after you're gone. So in buying in durability is trying to figure out whether or not those clients will actually stick, will they be transitioning to you, it's a relationship business, and what will actually happen. And that is one of the most difficult parts of the whole aspect of it. So buyers are one of three types. One are simply bottom line oriented. They're simply just increasing their bottom line. They're just balance sheet oriented. But that's how you get the minimum value for your practice. Then you're looking at financial value on the continuum of value. You're looking at the financial value of a practice. People start looking at the profitability of your practice, the free cash flow, where can it cut corners, where can you get more efficiencies, that sort of thing. But to get a premium price for your practice and have it stand amongst the crowd, your practice should be one that someone could look at as being of strategic value, for which they would pay a premium value to have, to acquire. And once you get your head around that, then I think you're on the way to actually building value. And if I could just take 1 minute or maybe a minute and a half to kind of tie in what John and George have been saying to the opening question you asked all of us, very pragmatically. When you're looking at continuity planning or contingency planning, exit planning, succession planning, I said they're all part of one thing, they're all part of the same thing. Pragmatically, you don't know where to get started, do this. Make a list of the duties that you perform or that someone in your practice performs that generate revenue. Just write down the duty. What is it that generates revenue in your practice? Then prioritize the top 5 things on that list. And once you prioritize the top 5 things on the list, then write down what it is you actually do on a day-to-day basis to make those things happen. How do you do those things? And why do you do those things? And if you wrote all those things down, you would be well on your way to formulating an exit plan, a contingency plan, a continuity plan, and a succession plan. And it's not that complicated. Just write down the top 5, come to a list of the top 5 things that have to be done. If you weren't here tomorrow, what are the top 5 things that you would do if you're here? And if you weren't here, who's going to do them? How are they going to do them? And why those particular things? Because it helps set your business and your practice apart from somebody else's. This is what makes you different. This is what your clients are expecting from a continuity of service perspective. And if you write those things down, you kind of build it out in different directions from there. But that's a very easy, pragmatic start to this whole process that we're talking about today.
That's excellent. So thanks so much, Peter. Guys, we're a little bit short on time. We could talk about, I have way more questions for you, but we would need half a day to get through them. I could listen to you for a half a day. But Roland, I know we have some questions from the attendants, so why don't I turn it over to you and you can identify what those questions are.
Hey, that was fantastic, guys. The hour just really flew by. Thank you all so much. Not surprisingly, just based on some of our poll results, 90% either don't have a plan or an informal plan, and 40% indicate that the biggest challenge is deeply personal and they have difficulty finding a successor. We have a lot of we have a lot of questions, surprisingly, from buyers who are having issues with successors. One question from Mr. Anonymous: I'm working very close with a senior advisor who helped bring me into the industry. Myself and one colleague manage 70% of the client relationships. I'd very much like to continue being with this firm and his potential successor. He insists that we'll be taken care of, but hasn't actually formalized anything. How should I approach him about A, formalizing, and B, offering us equity to ensure that we stay incentivized?
Let me jump in on that one just quickly, Roland. when we talk to advisors about succession, the number one issue that they describe as the biggest challenge is finding a qualified successor. And so in situations like that, it's possible that although these people have worked together for some period of time, that the vendor, the seller, is not yet fully convinced that they could be the ideal candidate to take over their business. That's one possibility. The other one, and probably more relevant in terms of encouraging a discussion, is for the potential buyer to try to put themselves in the shoes of the vendor. And one of the biggest dimensions on which people have to be prepared before they can exit the business is emotional, not necessarily financial. And it's very difficult for someone who spent 25, 30, 35, 40 years building a business to imagine themselves doing anything else or handing that business off to someone under whatever terms might be proposed. So my encouragement to that group of people would be to try to get close to the founder of the business, try to understand what emotional issues they have and what kind of transition arrangement might be acceptable to them. It's not necessary that equity and management of the business transfer simultaneously. They don't have to go in lockstep, so maybe there's a partial solution in partly transferring some aspect of the relationship, but not all of it entirely.
I'd like to add to George's point. I think from the seller's standpoint, the senior advisor, one of the challenges if we put ourselves into his or her shoes is capitalization. There are lots of people that want to be acquirers of business, and as a seller, not only do they want to assess the ability of the junior associate advisors to be able to service the client needs, but it's also the capitalization to be able to afford and acquire some of these practices. And the practices I look at, $100 million practices producing, let's say, 100 basis points of gross revenue. That's $1 million of annual revenue. That business could be worth, $3 to $3.5 million. And so if you're a holder of that asset, you hold tightly onto that, and in order to be able to let go a little bit, is you also have to have comfort in not only the capabilities, as George shared, of that advisor to buy the business, but also the finance equation. And some of the structures that have been used may not give the seller the kind of comfort that they need to let go of, forms of commission sharing arrangements, payments over time. But the suggestion I would have is make sure that you have some capitalization, and maybe the approach would be to acquire in chunks of business and demonstrate not only the planning, client service, relationship capability, but the affordability of the capitalization. I think that would go to ease some of seller concerns.
Thanks, John. Yeah, maybe a final question, guys, and attendees. There's a bunch, and we'll certainly get to all of them in our follow-up. But final question, comes from Ken. Ken's asking, it's more of a mechanical question. With businesses where there are multiple equal co-owners, are there succession planning processes that will address each of the respective owners' separate succession planning wishes within the same company?
There isn't that, from my perspective, there's not really a hard and fast answer to that, because, these four people are doing business together, but I really don't know under what terms. Are these just four people getting together, they're sharing expenses? Do they share a common vision? Are they all the same age? Those sorts of things. So you need to figure all that out before you can really answer that type of a question. So I can only answer that question with 3 or 4 questions. So that's an important thing. Although, one of the knee-jerk responses you have with that, if there are 4 partners and one wants out, is that the assumption that the 3 will buy out the 4th one, or that they should have the right of first refusal to buy out that type of a practice. So you need to noodle it out. The 4 of them need to get together and decide what was going to happen if one exits or more exits. I've dealt with situations where you've had 2 advisors working together. One came on kind of as a junior partner years ago. the oldest person is now hitting 70 or 71. The younger guy was 55. And when the older one says, I'm ready to go, the younger guy says, it won't be the same if you go, then I'm going to go at the same point in time. So as a matter of fact, there was not going to be a transition from the 71-year-old to the 50-something-year-old. They were both going to leave. So you need to figure out what each person's idea is of where they want to go next and what they want to do. Work that out between the four partners, and then find out whether or not anyone from the outside may go. In one situation, as an example, there may be a successor, a nephew, a niece, a daughter that wants to get into the business. Great, as long as the rest get along with that. But that's a collective decision that has to be made. And that's where you're also going to find out what's going to happen if these four people don't get along somewhere down the road when someone new comes into the picture.
Hey.
Roland, I think Ken needs a consultant.
I think so. And there's certainly some great advisors on this panel. And on that note, I guess I'm giving you, Peter, the last word. Thank you so much, gentlemen. But just out of respect of everyone's time, I'm just going to wrap things up. Huge thanks to our distinguished panel, George, John, Peter, and of course, Afsar, for leading us through this engaging dialogue. As confident as I know they've inspired you, they've certainly continued to inspire myself and the work that we do over at FindBob. In recognition of their time and energy and for their important voices today, a donation will be made on behalf of our great panelists to the Candle Helps charity of their choosing. Great big thank you to our incredible participating companies for supporting BCA Month. And once again, folks, don't forget to tune in next week as we have not one, but two sessions on valuation, plus a legal perspective on book ownership issues. If you haven't already, claim your all access pass by going to our landing page by clicking the link in the chat. On your way out, remember, keep 2 meters apart, answer our feedback poll, and let us know if you're finally ready to accept the challenge and commit to putting a continuity and contingency plan in place before the end of the year. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And for several of you, we'll see you next week. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Take care, all. Stay healthy.
Bye.